Hello. So today I have a very senior person on the show, Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan. You don't need his introduction. The former vice chairman of Hindustan Unilever Limited, the former director of Tata Sons, and now a writer and author. Sir has got many achievements under his belt, and we are really honored to have him on the show. So welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Yes, sir. So, sir, my objective here is to bring people from different walks of life, partners of Big Four, traders, IIM directors, people like you, so that you can share your experiences with the young people and guide them in their career decision-making process. So, my first question to you will be that, sir, can you please share some snippets from your formative years way back in 1954 in St. Xavier's Collegiate School. And I'm very proud of that because in 2003, I was also there in doing my BCom. So what was that one turning point which redefined your career trajectory and which probably a lot of people would not be knowing about? So that would be my...
Well, I don't know whether people know about it, but let me just tell you just one or two instances. When I was in St. Xavier's College, after finishing school, at the conclusion of my BSc Physics Honours, Father De Bono, who was the principal then of the Science College, asked me whether I'd like to go for an interview to a company called Mackinnon Mackenzie, a shipping company, and that he is entitled to only recommend two people from the college, and would I like to be one of them? And back in 1964, to join a company sitting in Fairlie Place in Calcutta, Mackinnon Mackenzie, with a salary, I think, of 450 rupees or something, seemed like a dream job. And it looked like, you could stay there all your life and retire from there. I went for the interview and I was put through certain stages of the interview when they said that you have to also now meet the managing director. It was a gentleman called Mr. Mohidas, M.R. Das. And I was very surprised because I said, I'm an 18-year-old fellow. Why should I meet the managing director? But anyway, I met him. And the managing director looks into my eyes and says, if you don't mind, I'll call you son because you're so much younger. Do you really need the job? Does your family need the job? And I said, no. He said, then my advice to you is you must study more. You're only 18. You've just done a BSc. And my career came about in a different period. But your career will come in a very different India. To be highly qualified is very important. To be curious and keep learning is very important. And you're too young at this point of time to be able to learn and understand to do that. Of course, my father was very, very upset because he said, who told you that we need the jobs? You could just carry on studying. And of course, I went on to study further and then I got a job in Unilever. But that remained with me for a long time, that young people should prepare their lives for the career in the times that they will happen in the future and not in the times that happened in their parents' past. And that was quite a good turning point for me because it taught me the importance of curiosity, learning, and keeping up to date and relearning, which of course stayed with me through my career. So that is a very important turning point for me at a very young age.
Of missionary education, because that is very highly convent education, the missionary fathers.
Well, I studied in a missionary school with the Jesuits, and I was curious about the Jesuits because while I didn't have to attend the church or the mass, I was surrounded by padris, as people in St. Xavier's in those days used to be. I don't know how it is now. And I learned something about who Jesuits are. And I learned that they have something which they call the retreat. And a retreat is the equivalent of what we call Vipassana. They go away, they are in solitude, they have to think about they're locked out, to use the modern terminology. And in those 4 or 5 weeks, they learn about themselves and about life. And there's a certain rigor to it. Just like Vipassana doesn't mean just keeping quiet. There's a certain rigor to it when you go to Vipassana. And that caused me at a very young age to realize the importance of solitude, of managing solitude, of reflecting on experiences and discovering your own truths. Because your own truths are extremely valuable in recharging your intellectual battery. So that's the second influence that I can mention, that having a Jesuit education taught me, and I value that very much.
And so you learned like 6 languages, English, Bengali, Hindi, Sanskrit, and Tamil, and one more probably. So is this something you were very reluctant to and was like imposed by your parents, or you were very fondly wanting to learn all of these languages? And later, like during Unilever, you had an international stint as well. So what this complexity of languages that you had mastered during your formative years, did that help?
Well, I don't think I am very unusual or exceptional. Many Indians speak 2 or 3 languages. Depends on who you're talking about. I'm not talking of a small guy, village guy who comes from Siwan or, a small place. You probably know your mother tongue, most likely. You probably know Hindi. And in order to advance in life, some tuta-futa English, if not King's English, people will speak. So it's very common for an Indian to speak 3 languages. And those who are in the cities, maybe a bit more. So in my case, I didn't do anything exceptional. I mean, I was in a Tamil household, so we spoke Tamil at home. I would step out onto the streets of Calcutta and they would be speaking Bengali. So you wanted to, even if it's not perfect Bengali, you learned something. In school, Hindi was my first language. So I was stuck with studying Harivansh Rai Bachchan and Hazari Prasad Dwivedi, Jaishankar Prasad, and people like that. So, you had to learn Hindi. And back in the 50s, it was thought that Hindi is a national language. In my career in the future, Hindi will become very important. So Hindi. My parents believed Sanskrit was a root language for all Indian languages. So Sanskrit was being offered as a 3rd language in the school. So I studied Sanskrit for 3 years, but I'm not fluent in Sanskrit, And as you grew, I started moving to Maharashtra, Gujarat. I married somebody from Andhra. So you start to learn a smattering of many languages. And I think many Indians are in that category. I'm not exceptional for sure. And it's a reflection of the adaptability of Indians. One of the reasons I've said in my Made in India Manager book that Indians are so adaptable is they have to adjust to their space in a family. If your uncle comes and your flat is small, your father will say, you move to the drawing room. You'll get kicked out. There won't be a bedroom. There won't be any space of your own, if you see what I mean. You learn multiple languages. You learn to adjust to whichever circumstance you're placed in. And I think linguistic adaptability is one facet of adaptability that all Indians have. Many Indians are subjected to, and I'm just one of them.
And nowadays the cult is to learn French and Spanish and German, because now people are eyeing that kind of a career. So would you recommend that that along with our regular studies which we do like CA, MBA or engineering, we also
I certainly recommend learning many languages, because I think there's a certain part of your brain which I call the linguistic part of your brain. And at a young age you can learn very well when your brain is very, very plastic and absorbent. And I also learned German, by the way. When I was in school, I did Grundstufe, I did Mittelstufe, Deutsche Sprachlehre für Ausländer in Max Muller, Kolkata. And I still retain I can still manage a few words. And if you drop me into Germany, with some difficulty, I will find my way around. It won't be perfect German. People will laugh at my German, but that's all right. I can manage. So I do recommend that apart from your mother tongue and Hindi and English, if you can fix in another Indian language or foreign language, is very well worthwhile.
Perfect, sir. So when you landed at IIT Kharagpur, instead of this 450 rupees job, what was your experience? Did at any point you had thought that, okay, I would have better joined this consulting firm, no, it's called McKinsey. Was it like that? Did IIT Kharagpur have placements also at that point of time? And then you chanced across...
They had no placements. They had an entrance exam, which everybody had to write, and I also wrote. And I must say, in hindsight, that although the life in Kharagpur is very austere in the sense that they are not. But then I was already in a hostel in Calcutta, in St. Xavier's hostel, so I was quite used to it. But Kharagpur is far away. I mean, today you say in 2.5, 3 hours you can reach Kharagpur from Calcutta, but in those days it would take 4, 5 hours. It was a long journey. You went by bus or train to the Howrah station, and from there you got off at Kharagpur, and then you took a cycle rickshaw. So you were really a community which had to fend for itself. And one of the things I really valued in Kharagpur was that you could run away for the weekend to some daddy's home. You know, IIT Bombay, IIT Delhi, they go away. Many of them, 70%, 60% of them. None of us could do that. Even the Calcutta-based people could not run away to Calcutta because it was not that easy to get away in terms of time. So we were a community amongst unto ourselves, whether it was drama, theater, adda, chai, debating, studies, all of it. And so I really enjoyed. I think many people in Kharagpur will remember that we flowered there as human beings. We might have come from completely diverse backgrounds, but we were forced to live together. And life is all about that. You don't choose who's your neighbor. You don't choose who's your colleague. You must adapt and learn to live together. And I think for not only for me, but many IIT alums will confirm this, Kharagpur alums, that Kharagpur was a very, very formative part of their lives. I never regretted not having taken the McKinsey job. And anyway, that company didn't exist after another 10, 15 years.
Okay. So 1967, you completed your course at IIT Kharagpur. Was it like serendipity that you chanced across this advertisement in the Statesman where you had this systems analyst job in the Hindustan Levels at that point of time? Was it like random luck?
You know, we didn't have placements in those days. Nobody came to the campus. And there was a war with Pakistan in 1965. There had been a Chinese war in 1962. And the biggest recruiters were the Army and the Air Force and the public sector units. And I was not eligible to join the Air Force and so on because of my eyesight. You know, I'm fairly myopic. And I had done my, industrial training. 1 year I did it in Nelco in Bombay, which was a radio assembly factory. And 1 year I went, yes, Tata Group. And one year I went to Bhabha Atomic Research at Bombay. And somehow I didn't take to either of them as being my likely career. I'm not sure why. Right? You know, sometimes you just take to something. And all my IIT friends at the end of the pre-final year would start applying to United States universities. In those days, I think almost 60%, 70% went abroad. But I was the vice president of the Students' Gymkhana, which meant that I was like a general secretary or president of the Students' Association and very much involved with the literary festival, the sports festival. I led the IIT Kharagpur contingent to the inter-IIT meet at Bombay. So I was very busy with all my extracurricular activities. And of course, I had to keep my academic also going. I never applied to any United States university. So come January 1967, people started saying, I've got admission here, I've got scholarship there. And I was sitting there with no job and no opportunity to go abroad. And I just happened to see this ad. They wanted people for their newly set up computer department. They wanted engineers, and I applied. So in life, many unplanned things happen to you, and I'm thankful for it.
And so at that point of time, you could have gone for an MBA, and you stated in one of your interviews also that if you had chosen for an MBA at that point of time, you would have probably been the first batch of IIM Ahmedabad. And then later, MBA became the cult thing, like your passport to the CEO world, which you anyways was achieved. So then in retrospect, did you ever reflect upon this MBA thing? And you did some stint at, then maybe at Harvard or something. What's your view of this MBA degree per se now? now and in those times?
Well, honestly, at that time, the MBA was a very unknown, management was a very unknown subject. And it seemed to be a general fluff. That was, in my opinion, it is not that it was so, but it is my opinion. Because I could understand people being students of physics, chemistry, mathematics, um, philosophy, economics, but this was a sort of a hodgepodge, this was it's an interdisciplinary subject, management. And I thought uh, going and spending another 2 years from Indian Institute of Technology to Indian Institute of Management might not be very fruitful. It was not a great judgment on my part, but I took that view. And so I said, I've done my BSc Physics Honours, and then I did my BTech Honours. Then I'll be going and doing a PGD even. How long will I keep studying? I had got the job, by the way, in Hindustan Lever, which is not exactly an unknown company. It was a very prestigious company. So I said, let's start working. At the end of the day, you learn by working. But once I joined Hindustan Lever, I found that luckily for me, again, this is an unplanned serendipity, it was a company which laid great emphasis on training their people. So I was sent to many, many courses, short term, 2 days, 4 days, 1 week. And I even went and attended a Indian Institute of Management Ahmedabad 3-tier program. My company sponsored me. So it was like a accelerated MBA. They called me an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad. So on paper, I am an alumnus of
Still
IIM
today,
Ahmedabad.
yes.
And so I attended the 3T program, and many years later, I was lucky to be sponsored to Harvard Business School for the Advanced Management program. So I'm an alumnus of Harvard as well. So if I have to be technical about it, I'm an alumnus of St. Xavier's School, St. Xavier's College, IIT Kharagpur, IIM Ahmedabad, and Harvard Business School. It's all happened a bit by accident, but that's all right.
All right. And sir, what was your starting salary at HUL? So if you were to compare with 450 per month, it would have been similar number?
No, I got a better salary. I think they offered me 650 when I was ready to join. And by the time I joined, they had done some salary revision. I got 750. So I started on 750.
Oh, that was much better than 450. Yeah, means 450.
Oh, yes.
So Mr. Scott Burney at HLL, he gave you that break in marketing and sales. So from systems analyst, you got into marketing and sales. So when you look at that conversation that you had with him, what was that probably the trigger that he saw a spark in you and said, hey, okay, Mr. Gopal does not have a formal background in marketing and sales, but let's give him a break. Because you had a formal background in systems, you were working in systems, and then there was this gentleman who said, okay, I'm willing to take the risk, go out there and experiment with marketing and sales.
No, it didn't quite happen that way. Scott Burney was on my final interview board. Scott Burney was the marketing director of Hindustan Lever, as it was called in those days. And he was one of the 4 members on my final interview panel. And at the interview panel, he said, do you think you'll make a good marketing person? And frankly, in those days, I used to think it's a bit down market to be a marketing person. I said, no, I'm a computer person. I want to do computers. And he merely said, think about it. Maybe you'll make a good marketing person sometime later in your career. If you change your mind, come and knock at the door of the marketing director. As it so happened, 4.5 years later, I did go and knock, but he was not there anymore. There was a person called David Webb by then. And they gave me an opportunity to make a comeback into marketing. Not a comeback, to enter
transition.
Marketing.
Yeah. And so at that point of time, did you ever think that in 1997, maybe like 30 years from your joining, you would become the vice chairman of this company? And what was your so what were your turning points in your career there, which eventually led you to get that visibility, and people thought that yes, he's the one who is.
I don't think there's anything special that happened in my case. I mean, there are a lot of people who have progressed in their career. I'm just one more of them, to be honest. In those days, we were very happy if we reached senior management level. Thinking of becoming a director was not in my radar screen. And vice chairman and chairman and all that was definitely not in my radar screen. So it is a bit like climbing a mountain. You think you reached a peak, and then you say, hey, there's another peak. And then you go to, there's another peak. And then at some stage, you may stop climbing the peaks. So I think opportunities would come, experience was diversified, and Hindustan Unilever made sure that you always never became a bonsai manager, because you were disturbed from your comfort zone every 3-4 years and put into new challenges, which helped a lot. I didn't think of it at that time. It was a bit irritating to get transferred from Bombay to Chennai, from Chennai back to Bombay, then Bombay to Delhi, then Delhi back to Bombay, then from Bombay to Saudi Arabia. People, you're mentally prepared. You're almost like a camper. Most Hindustan Unilever managers would not dream of staying in the same place. They would expect to move. A bit like in police or railways or IAS, they expect to keep moving. And as it developed, it developed. I don't think there was anything. I certainly had no game plan. If people say they want to plan their career, I think that's a lot of bull. Your career develops.
Yes.
You have to be the khiladi and not the umpire.
So in terms of marketing and sales, which would be that one challenge that you took and say, yes, in this territory, there was no demand, maybe I created demand or I became market leader. What was that one massive marketing and sales challenge that you took up and overcame successfully?
I never stayed in any job for more than 2-3 years. That if something you were participating in, to say that I made the challenge and I solved the problem. Now, that happens with people who've been around for 20 years doing the same thing. I participated in many challenges. For example, I was the sales manager in the north, in the west, when Nirma first made its appearance. And it took Hindustan Unilever 15 years. Lots of people participated in it. I also ran part of that journey to try to make a response to the Nirma challenge with Wheel, which came later. But I'm not the guy who worked on it. I'm not the guy who made it happen. So that is one marketing challenge that I remember, that it looked like they'll wipe out the company, Nirma, at one time. But then Hindustan Unilever got over its constraints and challenges with a very determined leadership. But I think the lesson that I remember the best at a personal level is I went to Jalandhar, and it was I'm not familiar with Punjab at all. And I worked in the marketplace with a very senior salesman who's a union leader. And he was twice my age anyway. But I was his boss, And I used to carry a little diary in my pocket in which I would put down time spent on greetings, on explaining the product, booking the order, merchandising. I used to have 5 or 6 things. And in the lunchtime, I told him कि नरेंद्र जी आपके बहुत समय जाता है, आप बातें करते रहते हैं about. He would go and say, how's your daughter, how's your daughter-in-law, how's your son, he would ask all these questions. So he said, देखिए साहब, आप हमारे अफसर हैं, आप दोपहर को आप कॉल करके मुझे दिखा दें कि बेहतर कॉल कैसा होता है. And I was in a dilemma because I don't know who's married, who's got a grandson. I had nothing to ask Lalaji when I went to his shop. And I didn't speak Punjabi. Neither would they pay, "Arey pappe aa jao," none of that warmth of greeting. And I had a very sukha experience in the afternoon. I would go there, he said, "Haan, boliye," and I'll say, "I'm so-and-so." He said, "Haan, kya kaam hai?" You say what it is, he said, "Acha." And the whole transaction was over. I did many more calls than he could. And in the evening, he said, "How do you think you did?" So I said, "It's quite bad, I was straight on the job and I just did what it is. I didn't know whom to ask. I can't ask about his grandson and daughter or something because I don't know them." He said, "Putter, yaad rakhna, ye business mein na rishta bahut important hai. रिश्ते को आप सेल्स कॉल नहीं मानते हैं, वो अलग बात है, बट यू मस्ट नो पीपल. लेकिन सबसे बड़ी बात है कि आपने मेरा काम करके दिखाया. आप रॉब ने दिखाया कि ये काम मैं क्यों करूं, तो आप कंपनी में आगे बढ़ोगे. जब तक when you learn, so long as you don't do your subordinate's job, you'll never learn the dignity of work. That's what he taught me. So I think That's a lesson I remember very well.
So then in 1997, you transitioned to the Tatas, and you would have had a lot of projects with the Ratan Tatas and the Ishaq Husains. And since I also have worked with Tata first as an auditor and then as an employee, that is a very special part of my career. So, sir, in terms of transition, again, in terms of organizational culture, the HUL way of looking at people and the Tata way of looking at people are also different. So then was that easy, that entire trajectory to become the vice chairman of Tata Sons then, or means a director on the board of Tata Sons and so forth?
But they are different. I mean, Calcutta is different from Bombay. They are both India. And Bombay is different from Delhi, but they are both India. So every city, every person, every company has its own peculiarities or special characteristics. So about that, there is no doubt. Unilever was a very process-orientated Western company. Unilever was very good at sorting out things into black and white so that you deal with the core issues. Tata is a very Indian company. It worked more through relationships than through processes. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying dono ki zarorat hai. You need process, you need relationships, both of them. I'm talking of the balance. If one was 30-70, the other was 70-30. In Tata, the people factor was very strong. Hum sab saath hai, in Unilever, the competence factor was very strong. Hum aapse behtar hai. So there is a difference in the way they both worked. And one has to adapt. Both have got great virtues, and I'm very fortunate. I could learn both and adapt to both. And both are wonderfully
in terms of the key, some major memory in terms of a project that you did, which was like defining moment in your stint with the Tatas?
Well, I don't know. You do a number of things over 17, 18 years. But one day I was asked in Tata's whether I could chair a Tata Group Innovation Forum, which is to make the Tata Group more innovative. And Mr. Ratan Tata told me that I want you to address the culture of the company, not the processes. Then you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And changing culture is very different challenge from changing. Most managers are trained to change processes, how to make a quality better, how to have less rejects. Those are all you can convert it into sort of algorithms or processes. But how do you improve the culture? How do you make the people of Bengal as industrious as the people of Maharashtra? I mean, that's a different problem. It's a different challenge. Or how do you make the people of Maharashtra as poetic as the people of Bengal? That's a different. So I knew it would take a lot of time. And I spent 14 years chairing the Tata Group Innovation Forum. I think I learned a lot because I got a chance to visit top universities, top companies to see how they do it. And that ended up in my writing a book called A Biography of Innovations. So I remember that as something that to me was greatly and deeply satisfying.
So in your public service engagements, and you've straddled the entire pyramid from working on pulses to Indian Railways, electricity, monsoons, and you've clicked almost everywhere. And is it like the curiosity factor in you that helps you, chair so many projects or work on so many projects with very different? So a railway project will be very, very different from pulses dimension or electricity. So in governance also, in terms of the entire contribution you had to Indian governance, that was like quite phenomenal. So what was the key factor which clicked?
No, honestly speaking, I wasn't chairing any of those sessions. I'm not an expert in any of those. Somebody invited me to join a panel on the particular subject. And I saw it as an opportunity to learn. Because I had no idea before that how electricity is generated, how it is distributed, how pulses are grown, how important is pulses, how do the railways run, are they efficient or inefficient? These are not subjects that were coming in the course of my own work. So each time I felt that I was being invited to come and learn again. Each one was a small MBA course because I would be sitting with 10 other people, and each one, no single person was an expert, but everybody knew a little bit of something. like the proverbial elephant. Somebody knew the pooch, somebody knew the trunk, somebody knew the legs. And when you finished with that work, it's an extra work, mind you, you came out a bit wiser. कि भाई इस देश को चलाना बड़ा मुश्किल है. इतने इतने तेरा अंग हैं, इन सब अंग को समझना मुश्किल है. So I think I saw it as a chance to be continually learning and challenged. That's why I joined those committees. And somebody made the mistake of inviting me to join the committee. I got a free program in learning about railways and pulses.
And so there would be some sort of a conflict also, that in private sector you would have thought that these problems could have been solved much better, much faster, and in bureaucracy, the way the Indian governance works, a lot of problems get stuck in for years. So you would have thought like that also, कि अरे मैं टाटा में होता तो इसको ऐसे कर देता. Like, had this been a Tata Group problem?
You get some sobriety because you realize that what looks obvious to you when you're sitting in your own corporate environment is not so obvious when you're sitting in a public environment. You also realize that you can take a decision in a Tata or a Lever environment, but in the public environment, you have to be conscious of many other stakeholders, parliamentary committee, media, society, and so on and so forth. So I think it brings you a breadth and a humility. That there is much more to it than what I thought by reading a book or a newspaper.
So when you finally hung up your boots for the corporate world, but then you still followed your father's advice that you should keep your brain still active. And then therefore you're dabbling in writing and authoring books, teaching, advising. And what is your view on this entire engagement? Is it like personally very satisfying? I keep seeing your LinkedIn post, in fact, like whether you should change jobs or you should change roles, but that should happen at a given frequency. These are things which youngsters like us really want to learn. And we are so grateful to you that you are doing this. What is your reflection on this stint of your career? Because that's very different from working in hallowed fields of a Levers or a Tata. And here you are like going on a LinkedIn, posting a video and waiting or seeing some comments, some likes. It's a transition, sir. So how is it different from your previous engagements and how satisfying it is?
Well, let me first say this, that I had a conversation with my father when he was still alive, long before my retirement. He had retired, but I had not, obviously. And he said to me that never put off something that's a passion and say, "मैं retirement के बाद करूँगा." Because in those days, I'm going back 40, 50 years, retirement meant you wore your dhoti and sat in your house and waited for your pension check, you know. He said, you must start doing it well before. So I wrote my first book when I was still in service. In fact, Mr. Ratan Tata wrote the foreword for the book, The Case of the Bonsai Manager. And he said, you have to continuously work to keep your brain alive, because if you just wait till you hung up your boots and say, now I'll think about what to do, then your brain won't work. And one of the things I found was very satisfying to me, which developed as a concept over a period of time, is that you don't retire, you refire. Just a replacement of one alphabet. Retire nahi, refire karo, because you started a third career as an author and a corporate advisor. And I realized that the world's richest place is the graveyard, because everybody carries his experiences and learnings with him to the graveyard, and it is burnt or put under the ground. We have such a rich experience of so many people, but we don't share it with other people. And if everybody started writing a book, the publishers will go out of business. So you have to learn to write a book. And that's what I started doing. I read books on how to write a book. I started practicing by writing articles. I've written over 1 million words so far. Over 1 million words, which is quite a lot. And I found writing became like a passion, like a gavaya, you know. He's starting to learn music at the age of 55 or 50. Okay, you're not going to become a great singer, but at least it'll be a passion for you. And each time I had a problem in my career, Bonsai Manager was a problem I faced in Arabia. And each time I had a problem, apart from solving the problem as a manager, I started researching the subject and reading about it. And I ended up writing a book. So I've got 17 books now. And जब तक है जान तब तक मैं नाचता रहूंगा.
I really learned a lot from your book. Like there was an instance where there was some sort of a financial impropriety at Hindustan Levers, and you went up to your boss and said, "See, we've goofed up, and this has gone out of our notice. Now, what should we do?" And the manager actually supported you. So these kind of lessons are like for a lifetime.
I think so. I think they are for a lifetime. I learned a lot that if you made a mistake, it's better to admit you're a fool to some one or two bosses than to look like a crook to lots of people.
Yes.
Had I not done that, it could have been in the newspaper and everybody would say, my God, he has done something wrong, you know. So
it's good that you went there, and the boss also was like kind enough to understand that, okay, you are honest. There has been a lapse. So reading about these things in the books, we kind of live so many lifetimes together. Means it's one lifetime probably is not good enough for us to learn from our journey. So thank you so much for doing that. Sir, one question that when I always bring very high achievers on this show is that, there are a lot of youngsters who might not have reached that kind of pedestal, and we in our middle careers also often feel frustrated that we haven't achieved much in terms of a CXO thing or a CTC level. So how do you define success? How do you balance professional glory and personal emancipation? And career could be getting limited by so many things. So for example, one's decision to stay in a particular city in his hometown to take care of parents, or not being very fluent in English, having one roadblock like you cleared in so many attempts, so you didn't get a big chance. So then you don't grow so much in the career. That leads to frustrations. And then how does one reconcile with that conflicting thoughts?
I don't know. The conflict is arising in your own mind, you see. If you have decided to stay in a particular city and look after your parents, then that is an important priority. It is not to be judged by somebody else. And automatically, it might provide some limitations on your rise in the company, assuming the company wants people to move out of their city. I made a conscious decision not to go to America to do an MTech or MBA or whatever. Therefore, I will never be a candidate, even if I was very good, to be the head of Google or Apple. Now, I can't hold that against myself and feel frustrated. There are multiple pathways to God or success, but you have to define your God first. You want to reach Allah, do you want to reach Ram or Krishna or Jesus, and then you take your path. And I think success in life, to me, has meant, am I learning more than I learned last year? Am I on an accelerated journey of learning? Am I improving? Am I enthusiastic? Am I passionate? And if those are happening, everything else will fall into place. And I think people who pursue self-improvement and learning, and there are multiple ways, there are lots of books on the subject, that for me has defined success. The success has been a side product, byproduct.
So, but things like not having a godfather or corporate politics, these could stymie your career in many ways. And then you would not have reached a particular designation, a particular CTC, and feel frustrated. I'm just saying because that's like a very common thing that happens.
Nobody can stop you from feeling frustrated other than yourself.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So if you find that it's all, you see, we all say corporate politics, there are companies with politics. But if you have become a politician and you're wanting to be in the BJP or Congress or whatever, you can't say you're both political.
Yes.
Whenever there's more than two human beings, there will be politics. Even in a family, if there are 4 sons and there are 4 daughters-in-law and 10 grandchildren, there will be politics. So you can't say, "Ye family acha nahi, main chhod ke ja raha hu." Yahan politics hai. So there's a certain amount of politics which you are a contributor to. Although everybody gives the impression that he's a victim, we are all perpetrators also. But you can choose your politics. Like if you're going to be a sportsman, you can choose whether it should be in kabaddi or you want to play in golf. But you can't choose kabaddi and then say, यार मैं कभी golfer बन जाता तो अच्छा रहता. So I think these are all matters of personal choices. And I believe that any frustrated person is frustrated because he has chosen to be frustrated.
And this became more relevant, because in the last week we saw this suicide by this famous Bollywood actor Sushant Singh Rajput, and there are theories which ascribe that to depression, having been left out of work, and therefore, I thought that it would be a good opportunity to ask your views on this entire thing.
No, I don't want to gloss over. I don't know about Mr. Rajput and his suicide, but depression is a disease that has come to modern society. I don't think you can run away from it. But I don't want to be judgmental about people who are depressed. That's not the right thing to do. It is like your eyesight is bad, so you put glasses. Your hearing is bad, you put a hearing aid. Some people get depressed. The pressures of success, career, power can bring these. We think depression happens only to poor people. That is not true. One must be very empathetic to this situation. So, although I have very glibly said, if you are frustrated, it's your problem. That's a very telegraphic way of putting it. You have to work it out of your own system. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, I got your point. I mean, you are the only one who can help yourself get over those negative thoughts. And only external aids like some sort of a psychologist or a counselor can just help you in that journey. But you have to be determined that I'm not going to let negativity come in the way of my path.
When I was very young, there was a film, I think it was called Boot Polish, if my memory serves, in 1952, 53. There's an actor called David, and he sang a song, Nanne munne bacche teri mutti mein kya hai, mutti mein hai takdeer hamari, हमने किस्मत को बस में किया है. That is a very nice Hindi song I love from my childhood, and each of us has to take his life that way. Okay.
So my final question, that your favorite song is मैं जिंदगी का साथ निभाता चला गया. So that has been your mantra for life, and you've always lived that philosophy, and how that helps. So that's my final question for you, sir.
So that's not a question. You're making a comment.
I mean,
it is not my motto. I love the song.
I read it somewhere in that how this helped you in your entire journey. So that is my thing.
So your task is to do your best.
Yes, sir.
And as the Gita says, the fruits may not come to you. Zindagi ke saath nibhata ja raha. Right. So I think it's a nice song. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Anurag,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Send me the recording link
sure,
or whatever.
Sir. I'll do that. Thank you, sir.